Hi everyone, welcome back to episode 2 of season 2 of the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. Today's guest is Guy Cihi. Guy is a founder, entrepreneur, innovator and designer. He is currently CEO of wordsandmonsters.com and Lexica, which produces Word Engine. He started his working life in Disney School of English, and during his time there, took the company from 50 to 300 million in revenue. I had a great chat with Guy, and I really hope you enjoy the program.
Hey everyone, buckle up for a new episode of the EFL Magazine Business Podcast, the one and only podcast made to help you launch your business or take your existing business to a level of success you could never have imagined. Whether you're a school owner, freelancer, publisher, or other entrepreneur, you're sure to pick up lots of actionable advice when you listen to the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. Remember to visit eflmagazine.com for great articles and features. Without further ado, here's your host, the founder of EFL Magazine, Philip Pound.
Welcome back, everyone, to the EFL Magazine Business Podcast. And I'm delighted today to have our guest, CEO of Lexica, Guy Cihi.
Thank you, Phil.
I know Guy for quite a while. I don't know how long we know each other, Guy. I think I contacted you first time on LinkedIn. I was starting the EFL Magazine website and we met in Tokyo. We had a chat. And I think at that time you had been working on Words and Monsters.
Yes, that's right. But we had to take an unexpected detour back then because we were still developing Word Engine, which is our core product, which teaches high-frequency vocabulary to English learners at all different levels of ability. And it is a premium product we sell to high schools and universities, and they generally assign it as homework at the schools that purchase that. The technology behind Word Engine is rather fascinating in that it can identify which specific words each person already knows. And you can, using frequency analysis, teach them the most frequently occurring words that they don't already know. So it's quite efficient and helpful, especially if people are testing them, right? Because if you narrow your focus down to, say, a TOEIC or a TOEFL or an IELTS test, and you identify which words they know and which words they don't know, but they're very frequent on those tests, you teach those first. And that's what Word Engine has been doing. And so we have many satisfied customers who use it for preparing people to do better on standard proficiency tests. That is our mainstay business. But I'd always hoped there was more to it. And that's when I started looking into games. Many people listening will have heard of games such as Candy Crush Saga. A few will have heard of games like Pokemon Go or Dragon Quest or Puzzle and Dragons. But these games occupy a tremendous amount of people's waking hours these days. Apparently 1/3 of the world's population play these games an average of 8 hours a week. So I was really curious about that industry. And of course, what keeps people coming back and doing it? Why is it so intrinsically motivating? So that was the beginning of Words and Monsters. And I can tell you my journey in developing it, it's really been quite a story. Like we started working on a game using a operating system called Titanium, and Titanium went bust. Everything that had ever been made with it had 2 years to live. And so I was dead in the water. I mean, it was so sad. So I took stock. I redirected my energy back toward Word Engine and improving it. And then about a year later, I had the fortitude to go back and pick up the pieces of Words and Monsters and try again. I did get very lucky. I had an intern who had studied game design. So he was fantastic. And I gave him a job after his summer internship. And he helped guide us into understanding what a game is. That's where we are. And we just released it.
So you've just released the game. What kind of feedback have you got so far?
So far on both stores, we have only 5-star ratings and everything's going quite smoothly. So I'm looking forward now to sponsoring the first tournament. The free team challenge tournaments are always popular. Teachers and students both seem to really enjoy them. So I'm gearing up for that, perhaps in November. for the first time in many years, my focus is not only on Japan. It's quite interesting to be talking to people on LinkedIn and on social media and at your events who are not Japanese or not focused on the Japanese market. Really fun to talk to English language teachers from all around the world now. And I hope to build a vibrant community of people who want to have meaning in their life, want to do something meaningful to help people to create community and understanding and comity, right?
So you brought up a good point there about operating a business in Japan. It sounds like a bit of a relief to operate elsewhere. Tell me about operating in Japan, the differences and challenges.
To tell you the truth, I love operating a business in Japan. It's a wonderful place for an entrepreneur. And if you're so inclined to work for a big company, it's also a good place for that. I've always enjoyed working here. The harder part is breaking into the market to sell things or to get people to try things.
So can we go back to the beginning of how you got to Japan and what you did when you landed?
I was offered a job to come to Japan by a client because I was in the consulting design business and I was doing designs for this company. And they liked them. And then this president of the company in Japan, doing business in Japan, said, would you be interested in becoming a marketing director for our company? And I weighed my options, and they were offering me a chance not to give me stock. It was a different kind of situation, but I was able to buy stock in what's called a management buyout. And I did. I borrowed some money from my father and paid him back later when this company made good. And I moved to Japan and became marketing director for a company selling English language learning services. But I was new, so they didn't really want to give me too much responsibility. I had to, learn the ropes, so to speak. But they did have this dusty product that had lost $7 million, but there were 2,000 sets of it in the warehouse getting moldy. And they said, well, maybe we'll put you in charge of that so you can try and, get rid of the inventory. And I said, all right, I'll give it a go. That product was called Disney's World of English. It's hard to imagine today that someone could lose $7 million on a slam dunk like Disney's World of English for children.
And what year was this, Guy?
1985.
That would have been around the same time that there was Disney's World of, they had TV programs, didn't they? With similar theme, similar name.
What really was impactful here was the creation of Tokyo Disneyland, which occurred in 1983, I believe, or possibly.
I think so, yeah. 83.
Yeah, right around there. Nonetheless, the company was losing money, but they put me in charge of it. And the first year I was here, I spent pretty much all my time on the adult services program, which would be classes. We had a telephone English program. We had seminars we would run. And so I did spend a lot of time polishing those businesses up because they needed it. And then Christmas came around my first year and I didn't get any bonus. And I was like, damn, I've been working so hard. What's the story here? And my boss said, well, if you read the contract, you'll notice that your bonus is linked to sales of Disney's World of English. So you didn't spend much time with that. And I said, yeah, but there were all these other problems I had to deal with. He said, yes, but the contract is you got to sell Disney's World of English. So the second year, I spent a lot of time trying to sell Disney's World of English. I really put my nose to the grindstone on that one and started understanding why it wasn't selling, what the problems with it were, and so forth. And then things started to turn around very quickly. And I'd like to think it had something to do with my diligence and my intelligence or whatever, but that's frankly just my ego speaking. It was just, I did some things that the insiders wouldn't have done. I just approached it from a slightly different direction because I had not grown up in this industry. I grew up in design. And being a designer is a process. You first must identify the problem. And so many people never identify the actual problem. They just move right on to a solution. They're grabbing things that they think will work. So in that case, I was able to identify what I believed was a problem. And I also was able to identify a solution, which was staring us all in the face. And yet I had to put my job on the line to get the company to back me on it. I said, if we do this, I'm sure it will work. And he said, well, you're asking for $70,000. And I said, yeah, I know, but this is going to work. And they said, well, it's never worked. We've lost $7 million. So why should we believe you? I said, well, if it doesn't work, fire me. So I did that. And fortunately, it did work.
And what was the product, Guy? Was it a cassette, a subscription program?
Yes,
Was
in
it
1985,
bundling?
it
Yeah.
was a series of picture books with cassettes that had been structured to allow a mother to play the cassette and essentially ding, turn the pages to expose their child, a very young child, preschool, to sounds and images. So even though the mother couldn't speak English, she was able to be like the host, the curator, or the guide. And because she's there looking at the books, of course, the child's fascinated with them too, and they're very colorful and pretty. So it was quite effective when done properly, but it requires a lot of work of the mother. So we had to find mothers who were not working and willing to put in that effort. So they had to be fairly convinced that English was essential for their child's happiness in the future. And that was our initial beachhead, our initial market. But as we grew, I learned just how much work is involved to take a mother who's not a teacher and turn her into a preschool teacher at home. And so with the advent of the VCR, we're talking 1985 was the first year of mass VCR penetration. We had over 60% of households now had a VHS or a beta player. I advocated for making a video series with Disney. So because we were having good success, starting to make some money. So people started listening to me, and I said, we got to make a video series because we'll get a whole nother group of mothers who are hesitant to take on that personal responsibility. And it's not like they think about these things, Phil. These things are going on in their mind. Okay? In everyone's mind, there are these little vultures sitting on their shoulder, negative voices saying what won't work. Some of the salespeople would hear is like, oh, the people say that another mother bought it and it was too complicated for her to use it. So, okay, that's the problem, right? Now I see the problem. It's not that there's a lack of desire for the children to learn English. The problem is the moms are hesitant to take on that load of work that they don't feel qualified for. Boom, we'll make videos. The best one we ever made was a series of songs that took daily rituals, daily events in like bath time, dinner time, wake up time, get dressed time. And we made songs out of them so that the mother and child could do these things to music, and the key vocabulary, which are carefully curated and designed, was all there. So they were learning by doing. Fascinating. That program was called Play Along. And we're talking about infants. I started getting letters from parents, and they were worried that the first words the child ever spoke were English. I thought that was great at first, but then I realized, what if I was raising my children and the first words they spoke were Russian or something, or Chinese, and I speak English? It was scary. It must have been scary for them. Naturally, when you take like the best minds in the world and you concentrate your effort into this video, and it's 20 minutes long of maximum transmission of language, there's no way a normal mom or a normal dad can compete with that. So I was, okay. Don't worry. As soon as your children go to nursery school, where there are children and teachers speaking in Japanese, this will correct itself. That was our only way to deal with that situation, because it was just so effective. Fascinating stuff. I would advise parents to anchor their child's first 3 years in their native language and then begin introducing the second language, honestly. Because if they want you to understand who you are, where you came from, they need to anchor you in that language. Language is culture. Culture is language. And so that's my final take on that. So I now recommend, I'm a big advocate of language learning from over 3 at least. And I tend to focus now my work on 8 and up and hopefully adults. And it saddens me that so much of teaching is just automatically assumed to be for children as opposed to adults. So.
Okay, yes. So I want to talk about the skills that you learn. So, you're a designer. You come in and you're tasked with running the Disney World of English, and you had a lot of stock that wasn't shifting. So, you didn't concentrate so much on sales. You were about, redesigning the department, troubleshooting for problems.
Oh, no. Quite the contrary.
Oh, really? Okay.
No, this is where it gets interesting. The product was sitting in the warehouse, so there's nothing I can do about it. I started focusing on the problem of sales. Why can't they sell it? what's blocking it? What's stopping it? And what is working? I mean, we were getting like 5 sales a month. So how did they get 5 sales a month? And that was where the answer lay in there. It was identifying the problem of the sales process. Later on, once it was making some money, and there was an interesting problem. It had books, cassette tapes, cards, and a card reader. You put the cards through. The card reader was a big hit. It was really because it moved. It would catch the child's eye. The moms liked it. But the card readers, 70% of them were broken in the warehouse because they had aged and they were and the company was shipping them with the product. So there was all these returns coming. And my predecessor had told the salespeople, well, just tell them it's got a guarantee. We'll replace it if it's broken. So 70% of the machines come back, and we send out another one, and 70% of those come back, and then they send out another. And you get a bad reputation doing that kind of thing. And the salespeople were losing heart that the company really doesn't care. So I came in, and one of the things I noticed is, well, the salespeople are upset because the machines don't work. So I tell you what, let's not ship the machines. We'll sell the set at a discount because the machine is going to be replaced. And as soon as it's ready, we're going to ship it to you. And we're going to hire a Japanese company to make the machines because these were being made in Taiwan. They were junk. And no one in the company had ever understood about manufacturing. It was a sales-oriented business. So that was what I needed the $70,000 for, was the tooling. We ended up hiring a company that makes parts for the Shinkansen, which worked out really well. These are high quality sense people. And I went out to their factory, and it was just a bunch of little old housewives and ladies in the countryside assembling our machines. But they cared. They cared that it worked. They knew it was going into a home with an infant and a child. And the quality went up. And that was, I'll tell you what made the biggest difference with that, Phil, was the salespeople looked at me, because the first meeting I had with them, I took the machine because they were all complaining about the machine, the Taiwanese one, and I picked it up and I said, "This is shit," and I smashed it with my hand on the table to bits, and they were shocked, right? That the company was suddenly, some representative of the company was being honest, and I said, "We're not going to ship these anymore. We're going to make a new one," and then I put my job on the line for the 70 grand. Yeah, it was fun.
I've recounted this story before, but for those who haven't listened to the podcast, it sounds like the CEO of Haier, the Chinese white goods manufacturer. He came to the company with a sledgehammer and he smashed up one of the refrigerators and said, "We're never building something like this again." So
I respect that.
Yeah. So you were working, you were a company employee. What happened next?
Things started to take off. Yeah, things started to take off. And I mean, there's so many little things that happened that made it work. And I'm trying to reproduce that same magic formula now with Words and Monsters. And it was that the mothers who used it and loved it, and their child was bilingual, right? They wanted a job to get back into the workforce after their child was in school. And so I started hiring housewives to be our sales force. So they understood, they spoke from the heart, from experience, and now suddenly they were able to get a good job that was doing some, meaningful work for them. They didn't overtalk or push it on mothers because they were a mother themselves and they knew the situation, right? And so the company's culture switched to, we care about the customer, we exist for the customer. And that was the first stage. It was very rewarding. The second stage in my growth as a manager and a business owner was that my employees are my customers too. I exist for their well-being. And it was a wonderful marriage. So things took off, and we went from 50 million a year in sales to 300 million a year in sales. I believe Disney's World of English is now the single highest selling English language learning program in history. It's in the billions that it's sold now and they're still selling the same product. Essentially, it hasn't changed. The stuff I made back in the 80s, that's the beauty of English, right? It changes so slowly, especially, if you're not into fads and slang and so forth. Basic English hasn't changed, not what you would teach a child. So it's been really marvelous. I mean, they went from cassette tapes. In my generation, I went from cassette tapes to CDs, then to DVDs instead of video cassette tapes. And we parted ways in 2001, the company and myself. My partner had died of cancer, and it got messy. And I thought, I've done this for 15 years. It's been really fun, but I think I want to try some other things with the internet. And so I sold my shares and I started incubating different businesses.
So this was 2001 pre.com crash?
Well, it was kind of raging in Japan. We had something called Bit Valley in Shibuya, where I would attend events and offer to incubate and host and finance startups. I've done 7 over the years since I was, fortunate enough to become able to do that kind of thing after selling my shares in the World Family business. And, I've owned a university, a medical university in Australia with 10,000 students across the country, 7 campuses. Is really quite a big deal. I owned that for 7 years. It had 3,500 students when I bought it. It's a funny story, right? As the ex-president of Disney Asia came to me, he got fired from Disney, and as Disney fires everybody eventually. So, and I had just left my company. He says, Guy, we've got to do something together, because he knew, what a success Disney's World of English was in education, and he desperately wanted to get into education. And we ended up buying a small medical college in Australia and growing it up through acquisition and also organically. Essentially, I took the sales techniques that I had evolved with Disney's World of English and applied them to a university. So we care about the students. We care about their parents. We don't have a part-timer on Tuesdays you can call for admissions information. We're 24/7. You can contact us anytime. We exist for the students. I just totally changed the culture of university. Like, you don't think this is a competitive industry. It is a competitive industry. Universities are in competition for a dwindling number of high school leavers. That's just the demographics. So that was really an exciting adventure, and ran that for, as I say, 7 years, and then sold it to a bigger education conglomerate and moved on. I've done other things too, but these are the education related ones.
So tell me about running a university, the challenges and what you learned from it. Obviously, you could apply, what you'd already learned, but what was different?
There are silos of competence and silos of influence and silos of control. So, for example, you've got your full-time teaching staff, you've got your contract teaching staff, and your part-time teaching staff. And most universities are stuck on the idea of academic, I don't like to disparage the word freedom, but we'll call it academic freedom, which is, unfortunately, it's abused at universities. And what it means is a teacher can decide what they want to teach, and they don't have to explain anything to the school about what they're going to teach. All they have to disclose are the materials they're going to require students to buy. So if they have a textbook, the school will need to know which textbook they're going to assign them. But other than that, their curriculum is never evaluated for cohesiveness with the rest of the program. I mean, in theory, you would think that these things are going to be thought through and carefully planned, but that's not how a university actually works. So we were looking at the university as a skill training entity, where people would come in desirous of, in this case, medical skills that they could get a license for and get insurance for with their degree, and then practice and help people. So I started studying, well, why do people come to this school? What is their motivation? Same stuff, right? Get into the sales again and get into the customer's head, and then orient ourselves to the market. But the teaching part was difficult to move because they had never been moved before. They were just like, well, and then the administration part is a silo, and there's a whole segment of a university that has to deal with accreditation to keep your, essentially it's a license from the government to operate a university. So these were all very difficult waters to navigate. Plus, it's a large entity. With 10,000 students, you can imagine we had a fairly sizable workforce. I believe it was 2,000 at the peak. It was an interesting experience in that way, that you had to deal with many different political issues that have nothing to do with education. And yet here we were. We wanted to develop a skills-based or skills-focused school.
I just want to talk to you about where you've seen English teaching, English learning from your time in Japan, from selling through Disney's World of English, through university, your awareness of what happens in a university educational environment, to now where we have, so many with the COVID situation, moving to online, a lot of newer, cheaper entrants into the market, especially in Japan. And then of course AI and games. So where does traditional English teaching fit into this, and what's the future?
There's a new program that's pretty popular. It started at Kanda Gaigo Daigaku, which is a university or college, specializes in teaching teachers, preparing teachers for the future. Many of them are going to be English language teachers. And about 4 or 5 years ago, they started a new degree program called English Coaching. They're not teachers. They're being trained to guide people in their self-learning journey. And, at first when you hear that, you think, oh, that's kind of silly, right? I mean, why don't they just do it themselves? But you might well ask, well, why are there so many personal trainers who get paid to help other people, do exercise on a machine? For goodness sake, they could just do it by themselves, right? How many reps you should do, and they keep you going, right? There's somebody who's paying attention to you, someone who cares about your progress. And I think if that moves ahead as it should, I think that's the future. So the next biggest problem is what's called intelligibility. Right. So you have something called interference. You and I spoke about that recently. Interference is something that comes from your native language, and it causes your pronunciation of English to be difficult for other people to understand. Your interference results in something called interlanguage. It's like halfway between Japanese and halfway between English. So you've got a heavy accent. Now, people in Japan might understand you. Other Japanese might understand your English. Certainly the kind English teachers who've been here a while will understand your English. But if you step outside of Japan, you thought you could speak some English, but suddenly you realize everybody's just going, what? And you lose confidence that you're able to speak English. They know the words, but they're unintelligible when they speak them. So there already is software that can identify exactly which phonemes you're mispronouncing and create rubrics, practice exercises to help you improve that pronunciation. So I think the future role for the teachers is to find the best stuff and be the person who talks to you about your learning journey. Be the human side of the kindness, the love that cares about you learning English. To think that you could teach thousands of words of vocabulary to 50 different students, it's preposterous. It's not a good use of your time. They want to talk to you. They want you to care about them. That's the role of the teacher in the future. We all have those teachers from our childhood we remember and we liked. And it's always the same reason when you break it down. They cared about us. They showed us a little concern, a little empathy. Instead of trying to be better than the automated systems that will teach pronunciation, that will teach vocabulary, that will teach syntax, instead of trying to compete with that, you become the guide to it, because there'll be a plethora. It's like going into the app store. How many apps are there in there? There's millions of apps. Which one should you use? And who cares? I care. I care which one you use. And I'm going to watch your progress, and I'll be with you as you do it. I think that's the future.
Hey, and further to that, I want to relate a story. Your Japanese is much better than mine, Guy, but the word in Japanese, darui.
Yes.
So how would you translate darui into English?
I always use dull. It's like what they call a mnemonic, right? Darui means tired and unfocused and dull. So that's
okay. Okay, so let me relate the story, which I think you find interesting. My wife is, as you may or may not know, is a Japanese teacher, and she teaches a lot of Chinese, Vietnamese, from Myanmar, etc. But one day in the class, she was teaching the word came up, darui, and the Vietnamese students couldn't culturally connect with this word. They didn't know what it meant.
They had no associate for that word.
Yeah, they couldn't. There's no, I don't know if there's no word in Vietnamese for this, or the experience is not there. So I think
there are many situations like that with Japanese and English and Japanese and other languages, in particular Korean, which has a very small vocabulary. When you translate a lot of words into Korean, for example, you need to use several words. I call it boxing it in. You've got to use numerous words to translate it, whereas between Japanese and English, there are more single word associates. That's interesting that the Vietnamese wouldn't have that word.
Yeah, my theory was, and getting on to our next subject, which was Bullshit Jobs, the book by Graeber.
I've only just come across, what's his, Graeber's name?
Yeah. Graeber, yeah.
Yeah, what he did on Bullshit Jobs, but it stood out for me because I've certainly, having employed thousands of people over the years, tried to eliminate meaningless jobs because they're debilitating. They suck your soul out. I've had people try to explain to me, well, just don't worry about it. You just work to get money and you just live for the weekend. That's real life. And I felt sad about that.
In the perspective of what you talked about earlier about bringing people together and your word comity, can you talk a little bit more about that and how you see work?
Looking at our industry, there's nothing but growth opportunity for meaning. I mean, this is a great time for teachers to take advantage of online resources, both to improve their skills as a teacher and to identify awesome apps like Words and Monsters that they can use with their students. Comity is a little known word, but it's a really good one. It means mutual courtesy. In its highest form, English gives us a way to express mutual courtesy between cultures. And as Nick Lowe first wrote in 1974, what's so funny about peace, love, and understanding?
So it's a fascinating chat. We could go on, but I just want to kind of wrap it up for today. And I just want to wrap it up with Words and Monsters. So please. Tell me, Words and Monsters, it's been released. Yes. What's it about? What's the gameplay? As you know, Guy, I'm not really a video game person, so I don't know all the lingo for video games. So it's the kind of a fantasy sorcery game where you collect crystals. I don't know what that's called.
Narratives. I love it. So let me tell you a story about a really fantastic, highly evolved society and culture, which existed on an archipelago of 8 islands called Pangaea. And it had a benevolent system of government and self-expression and spirituality. It was unfortunately infected with a virus of evil in a sorcerer. And the sorcerer realized he could take over this world and grab its power by destroying its spirit. And the way he chose to go about it was he first caused economic strife between the islands and causing one island to believe that another island was cheating it. This led to some wars and anger, which he was orchestrating from the background. And then he convinced people through his control of the media that it was the language that was causing this. And he got one of the islands to buy into this, and they got rid of their books. They focused on just talking. And it was great because their economy suddenly boomed, right? I mean, it was all being managed in the background, but everyone was happy. Peace, jobs, children happy, teachers happy. This is easy. We just talk. It only takes 2,000 word vocabulary to talk. But no one really thought about the consequence of not having a larger vocabulary, like Sapir-Whorf's hypothesis that we think with words, and without words, we're unable to think. And we can feel, we can react. So this goes on, and island by island, they all give up their writing, and eventually they're just down to talking, and everything's going great. And then suddenly, bang, there are these monsters that appear. And the monsters can't be dealt with by the people. They've lost the ability to formulate advanced thinking. All they can do is talk about how afraid they are of it. And they're enslaved. Now we're 800 years into the future of Pangaea, and you land on the shores of one of the islands. Your ship is shipwrecked, and you're attacked by these monsters. They don't want outsiders coming in, bringing any kind of information from the outside world. But you are able to defeat them by reconnecting the broken language. So you're defeating monsters by empowering people by reconnecting their language. And that's the story behind Words and Monsters. But it's so dark and gloomy that my staff said, don't ever tell that story to anybody. So I never told you that story. It's just a fun game, and you beat monsters. You actually don't kill them. You release their spirit because they've been enslaved by the sorcerer. So you're helping them too, right? They go back to dust because they're 800 years old. And you recover the language of the people. And eventually we're gonna defeat this sorcerer and take back Pangaea. As you start to beat monsters and secure your foothold in the island, you can play with other people who are there too, other heroes who've come. And your character, you can choose what your character looks like and what kind of weapons it acquires and uses. It works for an 8-year-old child. It works for me. It works for you, Phil. I mean, it's got words in there that go up to the GRE, and it's teaching them using paired associate tasks, which is a form of associative learning, which is quite well proven and very fast. Like students can learn 6,000 or 7,000 words in 6 weeks. You can select a course for TOEIC or TOEFL or IELTS or ACAN, and then it's going to teach you the most frequent words from that. And it's very effective from that perspective. But we really wanted it to be fun. So we studied these free games and why they're fun. And the reason they're fun is a neurotransmitter called dopamine. Dopamine is associated with long-term memory. The things that happen during the day that excite dopamine reverse flow while you're sleeping, and the dopamine goes to the hippocampus from your working memory. So things that are important to be memorized flow into your brain while you're sleeping. This is the science of knowledge acquisition. Dopamine's also kind of fun. You get jacked up on it. And I want games to do something meaningful for society, not just suck out people's dopamine. So I made Words and Monsters a really good game, but it teaches English.
So today was about dopamine and oxytocin, because bringing people together and, comity, and we're going to wrap it up, Guy. I know we could stay talking for a long time. If people want to contact you, what's the best way to get in contact? If they want to work with you, they want to know more about Words and Monsters, or want to,
I would look for me on LinkedIn now. I'm really social on LinkedIn. The game is out. It's there. So take advantage of it. It's free. I recommend it for age 13 to age 80. Have them play it. And there's all kinds of bells and whistles for teachers so you can see your students' progress. We're going to have these tournaments again. Those are always a big hit with teachers and students to join a vocabulary study tournament. So make a team of students, join them in the tournament. They're free. Win recognition and prizes and so forth. And I don't expect everybody's going to play this game, but I think more people than not will enjoy playing it. We're definitely in a situation where it's going to help English language learners feel like learning is less like work and more like play. And those good feelings will flow back to the teacher who introduced it. You don't really need to do anything like interact or run a lesson based off the vocabulary that's being learned. You can, but you don't need to. It's more about like, let's hit the next target together, or let's be in the top 10 of India or the top 10 of Japan. So far, the team competition has been the thing that catches people's eyes. So I'm definitely going to keep promoting those. And with your help, thank you.
Yes,
very much.
Absolutely. And we'll send a mailer, and also we'll have details in the show notes as well. Links to all your to Words and Monsters and Lexica as well. And for now, Guy Cihi, thank you very much.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for listening.
Thanks for listening to the EFL Magazine Business Podcast with Philip Pound. For more great advice and resources, check out eflmagazine.com. If you found this podcast helpful, be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. See you next time.